So you have been described as the most hated scientist in America because of the whole seed oil tobacco.
I would like to see the myth that seed oils are toxic retired because it's incorrect.
Snacking. I need to talk about snacking. Like, we all snack. I'm a ferocious snacker.
About 35% of people snack late at night. I can see I'm one of them.
Sometimes.
We all might obsess over our evening meal, etc. But actually a quarter of our calories are coming from our snacks.
They look at an ingredient label, they've read something in a magazine. Is that the whole story?
With the food that is now produced, we need to be looking beyond the label. We know that food on average contains about 55,000 unique chemicals.
Why is there hype around these single ingredients?
We take a single food, a single ingredient, and we demonise it in such a way that is so convincing yet so contrary to the evidence.
We'd be remiss not to talk about the microbiome.
We now have the technology to really do a deep dive into the microbiome. It is this kind of undiscovered universe that we're only just really kind of working out what planets are out there.
Can we modulate the gut? Are probiotics the answer to that? And if they are, do we have to take 1, 10, 50?
It does take a lot of mental load to change your diet. I think we obsess so much about what we're doing wrong. And it's like, actually, no, why don't you focus on what are you doing right and what can you do that's even better?
Hi everyone, I'm Barry Skillington and this is episode 10 of Straight Talking Science, so welcome everybody. Most of us are trying to eat more healthy or better, but a lot of conflicting evidence tells us not to snack, avoid seed oils, count every calorie, and so it doesn't really gel. And this message is now filtering into mainstream media as well as in academic circles. So with more than 35 human clinical studies, 25 years of experience, the chief scientist at Zoe in the UK, and she still eats bacon butties on a Sunday morning when she's hungover, or pancakes and Nutella with her kids. Welcome, Sarah. Welcome, Sarah Berry, to our podcast.
Thank you for having me. And you forgot to say that I follow the bacon sarnie with a chaser of
yes.
Cadbury's Dairy Milk.
You just told me that, and I was leaving you off. But well done for you. So, just to start off, I mean, I don't know if you want to give a quick bio on yourself.
Happy to. So, like you said, I'm a nutrition scientist. I've been a nutrition scientist for over 25 years now. Mm-hmm. I'm an academic as well as my role at Zoe. So I'm a professor of nutritional sciences at King's College London. And I've been there since my master's. So I did an undergraduate degree in physiology, realised actually I was fascinated by food and the gut at a time which was 25 years ago, where people weren't so aware of the importance, I think, in the general population anyway, of nutrition. So went on to do a PhD in nutrition sciences at King's, a postdoc at King's, and have stayed there ever since. So I get to teach undergraduates, dietitians, nutritionists, medical students, the importance of what we put in our mouth and how it impacts our health. Get to do lots of research as well, and then get to do a lot of really exciting, big-scale research as well at Zoe.
Brilliant. Sounds really good.
And I'm a mum as well of 2 teenage kids.
Yeah.
In between that.
Oh, right.
That's the hardest one.
Like a side hustle. Good God. Okay. I don't love starting with this, but there's no such thing as bad marketing. So you have been described as the most hated scientist in America because of the whole seed oil tobacco. Because you claim that seed oils are not a villain ingredient and that they can be part of a balanced diet. So can we just get that out of the way and address it?
Absolutely. So I was described, yes, as the most hated scientist in America because I dared to question the narrative around seed oils. I dared to actually not buy into the narrative that seed oils are toxic, that seed oils are going to kill us, that seed oils are responsible for all chronic diseases, because the evidence doesn't show that. The evidence from my own trials and the evidence from all the other randomized controlled trials out there. But there is this incredible amount of narrative that's put out there of misinformation, miscommunication around the science around seed oils, and just misinformation about them being toxic, about them being the root cause of all ill health. And at the end of the day, those kind of hard-hitting, scaremongering headlines, they get clicks, they get more watchers, and then you get a balanced scientist like me coming on, questioning the narrative, laying out the evidence in a balanced way. And that's not as interesting. It's not as sexy as a scary headline. And so, unfortunately, it's this misinformation that gets out there. It's what everyone's hearing. And then when someone like me comes on to question it, people don't like it.
Yeah, absolutely. But like, what does so the research that you've done showing seed oils and other single ingredients, I mean, part of the balanced diet. So for the listening audience that we have, you know, I suppose, why is there hype around these single ingredients, and what should, as a discerning consumer, we're all consumers, what should we filter out? What is the noise?
Yeah, it's really difficult because I think everyone eats, so everyone has an opinion around the food that we're consuming. And in this age of social media, of rapid communication, of communication that can be given by anyone, and anyone can appear to be an expert, even if they have no qualifications, if they communicate it in such a way that seems very exciting and very affirmative rather than cautious, people believe this information. Also, naturally, we as humans want easy information. We want quick fixes. And it's really easy to put the blame at one single ingredient or give the answer as one single ingredient or one single nutrient. And so I think that partly plays into it. It's this whole idea of, oh, here's a new superfood, here's a new super ingredient. It's far easier than facing the reality, which is that we live in a broken food landscape. We live in a food environment that makes it actually really hard to eat healthily. And actually eating healthily isn't rocket science. The basic principles of healthy eating are quite simple. Where it becomes difficult is that you go into your supermarket and it's very difficult to find often healthy food that is quick, easy to prepare if it's not the kind of thing that you're used to doing, if you've not planned ahead. And the whole seed oil narrative, I think, is a perfect case in point of where we take a single food, a single ingredient, and we demonize it in such a way that is so convincing yet so contrary to the evidence. And there's some really key arguments that are put out there that are quite convincing about why seed oils are bad for us. So you see these beautiful figures showing that as the intake of seed oil has increased, so has our rates of many chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and so much more. Yes, that has happened. The same time that our seed oil intake has increased, so has all these diseases. But what else has changed over the last 50 years? Everything. There's so much that's changed. Also, some people saying, oh, look, there's this link between the intake of seed oils and chronic disease. Well, where are we eating now our seed oils, i.e. what foods are we consuming that have the seed oils in? About 60 to 70% of the seed oils that we consume are in heavily processed, unhealthy food. So is it the seed oil or is it all the other crap that's in that food?
Yeah.
It's all the other crap in that food, because studies that have looked at seed oil supplementation on its own versus whether it's butter or other controls consistently show that seed oils are beneficial for health.
Okay.
And then there's arguments that are put forward that have there's arguments that are put forward that show very clever science, biochemical pathways, etc. And so we know, for example, seed oils have a particular type of fat in them, a polyunsaturated type of fat. It's called an omega-6 polyunsaturated fat. We know that it can be converted to a type of omega-6 polyunsaturated fat that can release pro-inflammatory chemicals. We know that can happen in certain animals in these very unrealistic settings. We know it can happen in a test tube. Does it happen in humans? No. But on paper, it's really plausible. It's showing all of these pathways, how this is converted to this, etc. And oh my God, you end up with this inflammatory molecule and this is responsible for all of these chronic diseases. It doesn't happen in humans. It doesn't play out in reality. And again, it's that last bit of the messaging that doesn't get across because it doesn't play into that narrative. And then against all of this, you have the current demonization of anything that's processed. And again, you have this narrative that seed oils are processed, they're refined, that they undergo all of these very scary processes like deodorization, bleaching, etc. And therefore, obviously, they're bad for us. And that feeds into this fear of anything that's processed is bad for us. Whereas actually, again, the evidence is so consistently showing, this is from randomized controlled trials, that consuming seed oils is a healthy part of your diet, that it doesn't increase inflammation. And there's more than 45 randomized controlled trials that have looked at feeding seed oils and looked at inflammatory markers consistently show that they don't increase inflammation, or if anything, they actually lower it.
Right.
There's so much more evidence. I won't bore your listeners with all of the evidence,
Yeah.
but these are kind of the key messages that are out there. And it's important to understand what is it that are the messages that people put out, and what's the counter argument? What does the evidence actually show? But how can someone in a 5-minute YouTube clip possibly get all of that nuance? And I think this is the problem as well, that food is so nuanced. It's so much more than just a simple list of nutrients. And so it's very easy to misinform people of the health effects of a food.
Which actually, for the next point, in terms of, it's a good segue into like the food matrix. So you go into a shop, and most people who have no background in nutrition or dietetics, they look at an ingredient label, they've read something in a magazine, and so confusion starts to set in. So is the ingredient panel on the back of, which is a legal requirement, is that the whole story? I mean,
Absolutely not.
yeah. So what is the whole story? Like, beyond that, what else can they do? I mean, they're looking at this and there's nothing else. You're not there telling them, here's the story behind this label. It'd be handy if you were. So like, what else, maybe just elaborate on using a matrix example.
Yeah, so I think that it's really difficult to navigate what it is about a food that makes it healthy, what makes it less healthy, by looking at the food label. And I think that maybe 50 years ago, the food label was really useful. The food label will tell us the nutrient composition, so how much fat, protein, fibre, carbohydrates, so our main macronutrients, how much was in there. But with the food that is now produced, we need to be looking beyond the label. And that's because we know that food is so much more than those simple list of 4 macronutrients. We know that food on average contains about 55,000 unique chemicals. And some of these chemicals play a really important role in our health. So some of these chemicals, we call them bioactives because we know that they have active roles in our health. So polyphenols, some of your listeners may have heard of. So these are chemicals, for example, in very pigmented fruits and vegetables that act on inflammatory pathways in a really beneficial way. Why berries, for example, are so healthy for us. So you have your macronutrients, you have these 55,000 chemicals, but you also have these chemicals and these nutrients wrapped in the structure of the food, which is what we call the food matrix. And we know that this food structure or matrix actually modulates how those chemicals, how those nutrients impact our health. Now, this didn't really matter that much 50, 60, 70 years ago because generally we were eating more of a whole food diet. But with the food that we're now eating that has generally been processed, with 60% or more of our calories actually coming from processed foods, this is really, really relevant. And it's relevant because when we process foods, we change, yes, often the nutrient composition of the food, and we might add in additives, emulsifiers and so forth. But the key thing that we change, and I don't think people think about this enough in the nutrition world, never mind, listeners may not have even heard of this concept. What it also changes is the structure of the food. And it changes it in multiple ways, from very simple ways, as in just changing the texture from a hard food to a soft food, changing the food by even grinding a food. You change how your food metabolizes, how you metabolize your food, how much calories you absorb from your food, how it impacts your health. And there's some really simple examples from my own research that I think illustrate this nicely. So, for example, if we feed people whole almonds, and we've done clinical trials doing this, or we take those almonds, we grind them down. So all we've done is ground them, and we feed them the ground almonds. So we're feeding people 2 foods, ground almonds or whole almonds, that on the back of pack labelling would have same ingredients, because they're both almonds, they'd have same nutrients, same amount of fat, protein, fibre, carbohydrates, same amount of all of those 54,000 chemicals. Yeah. But actually, they have very different impacts on our body and on our health. So we know that if you consume the whole almonds, you actually excrete on average 30% of the calories. We also know that if you consume the whole almonds, your metabolic response, which is the very short-term response in your circulating markers in your blood over the next kind of 6 hours, is very different. So that when you consume the whole almonds, you have a very small increase in circulating blood fat, which then corresponds with a lower increase in circulating levels of inflammatory markers and so forth. And so you also have these downstream effects in terms of your metabolism, in terms of inflammation, in terms of your hunger signaling, etc. And yet you've got two foods that, if you were in that supermarket, would have the same pack labelling. And it's so relevant because so much of the food that we have has had that matrix destroyed. And the reason is because we know that plant foods have a very special structure. So they'll have millions and millions of cells. So if you take almonds, for example, each almond nut will have hundreds of thousands of cells. Those cells have very rigid cell walls. That's actually the fibre. So fibre is essentially cell walls.
Yeah.
Those cells are tiny. They're smaller than a grain of sand. But within those cells has all the fat, the nutrients. Now, when you chew those almonds, you might fracture, so break some of the cell walls. So you might release some of the fat. But actually, you've still got hundreds of thousands of these intact cells. And you can actually see it. Like when you look, so for anyone listening, if you like nuts, look in your poo next time you eat nuts, you will see chunks of almonds. And we collect these as well in our studies. We do really glamorous stuff now.
Yeah. I said it already.
And you see all these intact cells with the fat encapsulated, which is so because it's coming out the other end. Because the cell walls are very rigid, they're very resistant to digestion. Now you do digest some of these, but a lot comes out the other end because the cell walls are still intact. If you grind the almonds really finely, now I'm not talking about the kind of grinding that you might do at home with, just a home blender, but the kind of grinding that you would use in an industrial setting, you're breaking all the cell walls, you're releasing everything from the inside, so it's rapidly absorbed and it's fully absorbed. And the same principle applies for so many other everyday foods. So we've done the same experiments, for example, with porridge. You can feed large porridge or you can feed finely ground porridge. And if you consume the large porridge, you have a very small increase in circulating blood glucose. If you feed the finely ground porridge, you have a really big, sharp increase in circulating blood glucose. That's followed by a dip in circulating blood glucose that we know causes an increase in hunger, causes you to feel less alert, to have less energy. You've probably heard the expression feeling hangry. Because you're having this you're having this big peak and this dip. And again, these foods would have identical back-of-pack labeling. You're just changing the structure of the food. You're changing the gut hormone response as well. So you're feeling less full when you have the finely ground food. And so that's why it's so important, I think, to think about not just looking at the back-of-pack labeling, because it's only telling you about those macronutrients, but to also think about, does that food actually resemble the food it originally came from? Has the texture been really changed? Has the structure been modified? It's hard often with the foods that are out there, really, I think, to make those calls. Another really hot tip I would say is, as well as seeing, does it resemble the food it originally came from? What's the texture of the food as well? And this is another big thing that we don't talk about enough in nutrition, is that we now know that by changing the texture of the food to be a soft texture, you tend to overconsume that food because you eat it so fast. And there's some fascinating work that's been coming out of a group in the Netherlands where they feed people very similar foods. They feed people exactly the same nutrient composition over the day from different foods. All they're changing is the texture of the foods from like hard foods to soft foods. So think of kind of hard foods versus baby food equivalents.
Yes.
And what you see is there's a huge difference in the amount of calories that people are consuming if it's a soft textured food compared to a hard textured food, because there's a huge difference, up to 50% in the rate at which people are consuming the foods. So the faster you're eating the foods, the more calories you're consuming, the worse your metabolic response.
Yeah.
So that immediate response after the meal. And again, and there's small things that we can do. There's a fascinating study that I think illustrates a really simple thing that we can all do at home to help us with this. And this is a study where they fed individuals on one occasion a burger that was slightly crispy. So they had a burger with a crisped bun, crispy lettuce. The patty was slightly crispy but not burnt. And then on another occasion, the same people came back and they had a soft version of the burger. So a soft bun, soft beef patty, slightly soggy lettuce. There was a significant difference in the rate, so the speed at which they ate those, and there was a significant difference in the amount of calories they consumed from those burgers. They were given huge burgers and told, just eat as much as you can.
Yeah.
And that was just by changing the texture of the food. And so that's another thing that we can do. Again, don't just look at the back of pack nutrient, think, is this a really soft textured food? And am I going to absorb it really quickly, so have a poorer metabolic response? Am I also going to be likely to overeat that food as well?
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. And that plays into a lot of, I suppose, previous guests we've had from different angles of nutrition, whole foods, try and purchase and eat as much whole food as you can. As you say, does it look like it came out of the ground or off a tree or wherever? But the whole texture thing is new, that the speed of eating, which I'm relating, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of the foods that I eat sometimes and gorge on soft burgers. We won't say the brand. But yeah, it really is like that. So,
I do think, Barry, just, to pick up on the speed of eating, I think what's fascinating about that is it really illustrates the importance of how we eat, because we think so much about what we eat, the back of pack nutrients, for example.
Yeah.
But actually, we're really starting to understand the importance of how we eat, the time of day that you eat, how fast you eat your food, the window within which you eat your food, i.e. the first meal versus the last meal. And what I think is wonderful about how you eat is it's something that everyone can do today without having any fancy metabolic tests, without doing a overhaul of their diet. And eating speed is a great example. We can all, whoever's listening to this, at their next meal, take a look at yourselves and think, am I a fast or slow eater? Most of us know. Like, do you think you're a fast or slow eater?
Fast eater, yeah.
Okay. So I know that I'm eat at a perfect rate, obviously.
Of course. We'd expect nothing less. So
but-
slowly consuming the bacon butty.
So, but you can tell as an individual whether you're fast or slow eater, because when you're sitting, whether it's with your family, with friends, there are people, like my husband has guzzled his food before I've taken my first mouthful. He says it's about survival of the fittest, but I came from a big family as well. I don't excuse that. My daughter guzzles her food as well. Right. My son eats about the same rate as me. I didn't need to do a fancy test to do that. So if you know that you're a fast eater, my top tip is just slow down the rate at which you eat your food. Studies have shown if you slow down the rate at which you eat your food, you have better metabolic health, you have lower levels of inflammation, but more importantly, you also reduce your calorie intake, which I know isn't necessary for everyone, but for the vast majority of people who do want to be mindful about their energy intake. The studies show if you slow down the rate at which you eat your food by 20%, you reduce your calorie intake by about 15%. We can all do simple tricks like that today.
And we're just talking here about, just to labour the point a tiny bit, slower chewing?
Yep.
Or just bigger spaces between bites?
That's a really good question. So there is evidence to show just even having bigger spaces between bites.
Right.
So putting your knife and fork down between each mouthful, that can improve your health, that can reduce your energy intake. And it's probably one of the reasons why we know that people who eat in a social setting tend to have better health as well. People who tend to eat their meals with friends, with family, etc. There is also loads and loads of studies around chewing as well, and around the importance of chewing. And there's some fascinating studies that have tried to kind of, develop the perfect number of chews for good health. And some people say chew your food 40 times before you swallow it, and that's the best for good health. And there is some evidence to support that. I would say, though, to anyone that's listening, don't try and chew every mouthful 40 times. Well, fine if you want to, but God, food is there to be enjoyed. And how you will enjoy that meal if you're chewing it 40 times, I'm not quite sure.
A little app for that.
But it's a double-edged sword as well. So if we take almonds, for example, the more you chew them, the more you're going to fracture those cells, the more energy you're going to absorb. But the advantage of that, you do also get to absorb all the other good nutrients that are trapped in those cell walls. So the vitamin E, for example. But if you don't chew it as much, then you're delivering more of the cell walls to your gut microbiome. It feeds your gut microbiome. Your gut microbiome's having a party because there's lots more stuff there for them to feed on. But then you're not, on the other hand, absorbing into your bloodstream all those other nutrients like the vitamin E. So it's always so nuanced. It's always a double-edged sword, and it depends what, for you personally, is your priority.
Yeah, and on the overall, every day is not the same.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's really interesting. That's good. Okay, so as we move along from chewing, number of chews, into the intestinal tract, I mean, we'd be remiss not to talk about the microbiome. Okay, so like microbiomes are individual for the most part. It's like a fingerprint, it's a footprint. We hear all of these. The media goes mad for microbiome recently. It's like the newest discovery that was never there. It's always been there. So if gut health is so individual, like how does it mean like personalized nutrition? How do you manage the fact that your gut is different to my gut? We eat the same meal, we'll digest it differently, and if we eat it every day, I'll gain 100 pounds and you won't. Why?
So there are basic principles that apply to everyone of what is a healthy diet, of what's an unhealthy diet. We should all be eating more fibre. We should all be reducing our refined sugar and carbohydrate intake, for example. And we are getting an explosion in our understanding of how we do differ from one person to the other in terms of how we process food, how food impacts our health. And yes, for optimization, we can take this personalised approach. We know through our own research that we've been doing at Zoe, where we now have data on more than 350,000 people, where we've been looking at all the different features that matter when it comes to personalisation. We know that microbiome plays a role, but we know that there's lots of other factors that also play a role. We know that genetics plays a role, but we know that it's actually a lot smaller than what we thought. That genetics in most instances, now there are some instances where it's very important, but generally plays quite a small role in terms of personalised responses to food. We know that there's just what we call phenotypic, so general characteristics that also play a role. Your age, your sex, your menopause status. You know, we've done a lot of work on menopause, for example, and depending on your menopause status, how you process a food and respond to food is different. We know that how you eat is also impacting your responses to food, and that is personal. Like eating rate is a great example. We all eat at a different rate, but we're also really starting to understand from our data, but also other emerging data, is the importance of the gut microbiome, the uniqueness of the gut microbiome, and the role that our unique gut microbiome plays in how we metabolize our food and the subsequent effect it has on our health. And this explosion is partly because we now have the technology to really do a deep dive into the microbiome. You know, it is this kind of undiscovered universe that we're only just really kind of working out what planets are out there. But it's also because the microbiome is so complex, just like the food that we eat is so complex. You need to be collecting data at a scale, breadth, depth, and precision that just hasn't been done before in nutrition research. So it's still quite an emerging area of research. But what we know from our own research at Zoe is that we know certain people have certain species in their gut that's associated with favourable health effects, and that is associated with particular dietary features. So, for example, we've identified one species that can actually tell us if that person drinks coffee. Now, don't ask me what that species is. They all have such long names, these species.
Don't worry, I won't ask.
But we know that if you've got that bug obviously loves some of the metabolites from coffee, and we can say with 100% certainty that person is a coffee drinker. But we also know and I think this is where it gets really interesting, that the microbiome plays a really important role in how we metabolize food and therefore the subsequent effect that might have on our health. And there's a really nice example that I like to use related to menopause, because this is something we've been focusing a lot of research on. And I think this is a really nice example of why when you hear something works for your friend or that influencer on social media, it might not necessarily work for you. So menopause is a huge problem. We know that 99% of people suffer, if they're peri or postmenopausal, from at least one symptom. 66% of people have 12 or more symptoms. 10% of people leave their jobs during the menopausal transition because of the burden of these symptoms. women are desperate in the menopausal transition. They will try all sorts of strategies as well as hormone replacement therapy. There are so many supplements out there. Most of them are absolute nonsense. I don't know if you've heard of the term meno washing.
Yeah.
So you stick meno in front of it, charge 10 times as much.
Yeah.
Most of it's like you might as well just go and have tap water.
Yeah.
Now, there is one particular supplement that there is some good data that it does improve health, and this is soy isoflavone. And soy isoflavones are a particular phytoestrogen. We call them phytoestrogens because they have the same chemical composition or similar chemical composition to estrogen. So soy isoflavones, and they're found in soy products, hence we call them soy isoflavones, bind to estrogen receptors in our body, so they mimic the action of estrogen. And so for some people, if they take soy isoflavone supplements, they have quite a big improvement in their symptoms. Now, the problem is some people have no improvement in their symptoms when they take soy isoflavones, or some people only have mild improvements. And where the magic lies with that is in the gut microbiome. And so there are certain species that can convert soy isoflavones into a really active form that binds really tightly to the estrogen receptors. And they produce a chemical called equol. So we call these people equol producers because they have the species in their gut that enable them to produce equol from soy isoflavones. It binds really strongly to receptors. If you are an equol producer and you take an isoflavone supplement, the research shows that on average you have a 75% greater reduction in your menopause symptoms compared to that person that doesn't have those species to be able to produce equol. And so that's why when I'm at the school gates collecting my kids, I'm 49, perimenopausal, hanging around with lots of similar age women, and I hear one person say, oh my God, I started taking this supplement, I feel great. And then the other person a week later or 2 weeks later said, I bought it, it's really expensive, it's made no difference. Mm-hmm. That's why. And I think that's a really great example of just how differently we can respond to food, but also the power that the microbiome has. Now, this doesn't apply for every food.
Yes, yeah.
But it's, I think, a really nice illustration, but also why we need to be cautious when we see, certain things on social media where, you see these women saying, oh my God, I had this, I feel amazing, my life's back on track, I'm in my second youth. Wow, great. But is that really going to work for me?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be a sucker in buying it all if I didn't know about the science.
So, okay, there's a lot there. I suppose there's a lot of questions that come out of that, but I don't know.
Barry, you did say for me to talk a lot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well done. So, we do clinical trials, as people might know. So we're a clinical trials company, and we do a lot of human research on different types of new-to-market products coming along. And I will say that while supplements, there's a lot of rubbish out there, but some of the newer, biotic-based, where there's modulation. So one of the questions I want to get to is, can we modulate the microbiome? And some of these supplements are built around modulation, and the science is really good, and it's showing really strong promise. So there's products coming, I think, that will be game changers in that respect, right? But in terms of modulation from food, then let's go back up. Menopause is a huge issue, and there is a discovery road for everybody because it's individualized. But in terms of modulation, can we modulate the gut? Are probiotics the answer to that? And if they are, do we have to take 1, 10, 50? Let's just start with the modulation piece.
Yes, absolutely. We know that our gut microbiome is highly malleable. Mm-hmm. We know that, as you've already said, it's different from one person to the other, but we know that it can change within a person. We know that it can change in as little as a few hours. We know that if you're starting on a dietary modification, in as little as a few weeks, you start to see quite a big change in the gut microbiome. After 4 weeks, you see a huge shift in the gut microbiome.
Yeah.
And
with intervention we're talking about here now, or?
Well, if
I change my diet to suddenly I'm eating all fruit and vegetables. I used to be.
You will see an improvement in a small improvement in a matter of days, a big improvement in a matter of weeks. Yeah. So whether it's you making a change to your diet, Barry, or whether it's from a clinical trial, same thing, really. Yeah. But even from small dietary changes, you see a big change in your gut microbiome. And I think that's what's really exciting is lots of people think, oh, well, it takes so long to see improvements when you change your diet. We see improvements in self-reported measures, which actually isn't studied enough. And I'm fascinated to know if you measure this in your clinical trials.
Yeah.
But as a nutrition scientist, I've run now more than 35 randomized controlled trials, feeding people different types of foods, diets, ingredients, nutrients. I always look at what we call, proper measures. So proper measures like collect a blood sample, collect a poo sample, saliva sample, whatever. Look at like biochemical measures. What we've started doing a lot more at Zoe is asking people, how do you feel? Now, in science, that's considered wishy-washy, self-reported stuff. My gosh, even if it's a validated self-report questionnaire, God forbid you ask someone how they feel. But actually, that's really important. And I think this is where, again, it's really exciting. And it does link back to the microbiome, is we see in as little as a few days, when you change someone's diets, improvements in self-reported energy, mood, hunger, alertness. And we see that there is a relationship between that and the gut microbiome. So we're seeing this very rapid change in the gut microbiome and a very rapid change in how people feel in the here and now. And we know the whole gut-brain axis is something that we're really starting to understand, that our microbes feed back to our brain feeds back to our gut, and so forth. And I think that that's really fascinating and something that we need to, as scientists, be measuring how people feel. So I hope you're measuring that in your trials.
We do. We measure a lot of objective and subjective measures. So objective being the blood sample, the poo sample, urine, saliva. But objective measures are very important, and they're in every trial. So quality of life measurement questionnaires, validated questionnaires. And you're right. Like for supplementation, you go into a chemist or a Boots or anywhere and you buy a supplement. If you're told like you have to be on this for 6 months and you may see a change, like omegas, I think, are a bit of a leap of faith myself, because it's long term and you may see an improvement, you may not. So you're bringing people along. The sooner they see an effect, the more likely they are to stay as a consumer. And so even step outside of supplementation, step into whole foods, and you start eating fresh fruit and vegetables, you will see a rapid, instant improvement. So,
and you can in some of the blood biomarkers as well. So we know that changing your diet can bring about an improvement in blood cholesterol in as little as 2 weeks. That actually by 4 weeks, you see a big improvement in your blood lipids, so your cholesterol, your triglycerides, and so forth. And so actually diet can change so many different health outcomes very quickly. And to change your microbiome, shifting your diet, even small dietary shifts, just increasing your fibre, increasing the diversity of different types of fibres. So from whole foods, for example, getting a diversity of plants, can bring about a change. Yes, probiotics can work. And probiotics can take the form of natural food. So by probiotics, it means, for listeners that aren't aware, this is actually, in simple terms, feeding people the bugs, the species. So this could be from fermented food, so yogurt. I don't think many people realise just how healthy yogurt is, for example. And I don't mean sweetened yogurt, but Greek yogurt, kefir yogurt, natural yogurt. Cheese, for example. So you see from having cheese, yogurt, or any fermented food, a shift in the gut microbiome quite quickly. There's also probiotic supplements that you can take. And yes, you see a shift from probiotic supplements. The only problem with probiotic supplements is they tend to be just 1 or 2 species, 1 or 2 bugs. And we're now really starting to understand that whilst the bugs that they're shifting are associated with improvements in health, that actually it's better to try and shift overall composition of your microbiome, not just shift 1 or 2 bugs.
Yeah. Which is really relevant and pertinent because, and I think a lot of confusion comes from that, is like, if I take one probiotic, it makes a minor difference, but what does that do to the cacophony of other things going on? So I think it's food is where you start and then you can work outwards from there. I think symptom specific, like menopause, to go back there, or metabolic syndrome, you can target those things with supplementation, but on the overall diet, gut-brain axis, you shift your fibre, you shift your microbiome, and you can, in many cases, improve your mood very rapidly. And so, as you say, the understanding is, we're at the dawn of the understanding, really.
Yeah, and I think, we underestimate how important food is for our mood. And there's some fascinating work coming out of a group in Australia looking at the relationship between the food we eat, our gut microbiome, and our mental health. And there is a study that was published a few years ago called the SMILES trial, and they just shifted people's diet. They just asked them to eat a less processed, a more Mediterranean style diet. And this is in many people who were living with depression or other anxiety related conditions. They saw a huge proportion, I can't remember the exact percent, but it was a huge percentage of people whose improvement in their mental health was so big, they actually came off their medication just by shifting their diet. Now, they did have some other support, but this was matched in some of the other control arms. And I think, it's studies like that. Okay, this is early days of research in that area that just show the promise of food, microbiome, and mental health, brain health.
Yeah, and we've done supplement trials that have had similar dramatic effects. So yeah, I suppose to the point that food and or supplements can supersede the need for medication eventually, maybe in some cases. Any one person who's off drugs is an improvement. So we're getting towards the end. Snacking. I need to talk about snacking. Like, we all snack. I'm a ferocious snacker, as in I snack a lot. And then I'm sure there's patterns. There's a million different patterns. Are you pro snacker or are you against snacking? And if so, what should it only be walnuts? Can we snack on Snickers bars? Please say Snickers bars.
No, sorry. I'm pro following a dietary pattern that suits you and your lifestyle. Some people are grazers. That's just how they are. That's just how they prefer to eat. That's what fits in with their lifestyle. That's their preference. Some people only want to have 2 meals a day or 3 meals a day. So my first thing is, I would say I'm very pro you choosing what fits with your lifestyle, what satisfies you. What the evidence shows is that snacking isn't bad for you per se. What the evidence shows is that the type of snacks you eat and the timing of the snacks is what matters.
Okay.
But there is this argument about whether having multiple eating events, so multiple snacks throughout the day, itself is bad for us, or whether we should be making sure that we leave long stints of time between one meal and the other meal to give our gut a rest, to give our intestines a rest, etc. And I think it's a really important question, and snacking is something that I think hasn't been looked at enough. We've done a couple of really big snacking studies at Zoe and also at King's College. And it's really important because 25% of our calories comes from snacks. This is in the UK, in Ireland, America, and many other countries. That's a huge proportion of our calories. We all might obsess over our evening meal, etc., but actually a quarter of our calories are coming from our snacks. And where I think the magic lies with snacking, and why I think actually it's a great opportunity to improve our health, is that snacking typically is under our own self-control. So what I have for lunch depends on where I'm working that day, how much I'm on the run, etc. What I have for dinner depends on what my fussy kids will eat. And I probably should have tried harder as a parent, but that's the reality of, I think, most parents. And yet snacking I can control. I can either plan ahead and have the snack in my bag for when I'm out and about, or I can have it at home. And our research shows that by changing from typical UK, US, Ireland snacks to a healthy snack, in this case to almonds, can have a significant impact on improving your health. So we ran a randomized control trial where people either consumed typical UK, US snacks, or they consumed almonds as their snack. And so what this research shows is that actually snacking can be a really useful tool to improve your health rather than us obsessing that we should actually stop snacking. And we've since done a really big body of research on snacking at Zoe, where we've looked at the frequency, so how many snacks you have a day, versus the quality, so the type of snacks you're having versus the timing of snacks. And what we found is actually the frequency doesn't really matter. So whether you have 1 snack a day, no snacks a day, 2 snacks a day, 3 snacks a day, within reason, obviously, it's all about the types of snacks you're having. Now, I know that might sound obvious, but lots of people think, oh, even if I'm having healthy snacks, it's bad for me because I'm eating at multiple times. If you're snacking on healthy foods, there is no increased risk of obesity, of any kind of other cardiometabolic disorders, inflammation, type 2 diabetes, so forth. What we do find, though, is that if you're snacking on unhealthy food, obviously it does have an impact, a big impact on those factors. What we also find is that the timing of snacking is really important. And this feeds into a whole new fascinating area of research about the timing of eating. And we find that those people who snack after 9 o'clock in the evening, and actually a huge proportion do, so we see that about 35% of people snack late at night. I can see you're one of them. I'm one of them.
Sometimes.
About 35% of people are snacking after 9 o'clock at night. And we find that even if you're snacking on healthy foods, if you're snacking after 9 o'clock at night, it's associated with unfavourable health outcomes. Okay. Now, this data is coming from what we call cross-sectional analysis. So it's looking at one point in time. So it's just important to kind of caveat that. But we do see that those snacking late at night, whether it's healthy or unhealthy foods, do have poorer metabolic health, do have higher levels of obesity and so forth.
9 or like a window? I mean, is 9 the magic time?
So it's not the magic time, but we looked at a few different times and we found that after 9 seemed to be particularly detrimental. Okay. But I wouldn't say, oh my gosh, 9 o'clock.
And starting,
that's it.
Are we talking kind of intermittent fasting, that window of eating?
So that's kind of a different question. So snacking is about the number of snacks you have throughout the day. Our research shows the frequency, the number of snacks you have doesn't seem to be that important. There's the other question about the duration in which you eat your food. So the eating window, when you have your first meal, when you have your last meal. There is a lot of evidence coming out now to show that trying to limit your eating window can significantly improve your health. Now, there is clinical trial evidence where they have really restrictive eating windows down to as small as 6 hours.
Yeah.
Now, that's a pretty boring way to eat.
You know, way to live. Yeah.
Having your first meal at 10, your last meal at 4. I mean, there's no way. I'd be a nightmare to live with if I did that. But what our research shows is that actually even just reducing your eating window to 10 hours. So that would play out, let's say say you had your breakfast at 10 o'clock and you could have your last meal at like 8 o'clock in the evening, which is quite doable for lots of people. Even having an eating window at 10 hours can still significantly improve your health. Okay. And it's about avoiding that kind of either habit eating later in the evening. It's also about eating in line with your circadian rhythm. We know that every cell in our body has its own little body clock. We know that our microbiome also lives according to a 24-hour clock. And we know that eating out of that 24-hour clock is not good for our health. And so that we're really starting to understand that trying to eat within a small window, 10 hours is more than enough, is enough to give your gut microbiome, your gut, your cells, your body a rest. It's also about eating in a window that's in line with your 24-hour body clock, so trying not to eat too late at night. So where the evidence is quite strong is that what we call early time restricted eating, which means starting your eating window earlier in the day and finishing it earlier in the day. And I don't mean going crazy and finishing at 4 o'clock, trying to finish at maybe 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. That has greater benefits than eating later in the day.
Right.
But where I think, and again, it's around this whole pattern of eating, the data is really interesting and very novel data that's only just emerging, is around the consistency of eating. And we all know that consistency of exercise, consistency of sleep is important, but we've rarely looked at the consistency of eating. And there's some new studies coming out showing that actually consistency of eating is really important. And by this, I mean not having an erratic eating behavior where one day we might have 2 meals a day and say, oh, I've been really good, I've not snacked. And then the next day you go and have, 2 meals, 5 snacks, etc. And then the next day you're like, oh, I'm going to be good and just have 2 meals. Our bodies don't actually work well with that erratic, unpredictable way of eating. And studies show that eating in a consistent way is far better for us than eating in that erratic way. So it's better to find a way that works with your life, that you can eat in a particular pattern, than saying, which I hear so many people say sometimes, I've been good this day, I've been bad that day.
Right, yeah. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence around that, and it's kind of coming through the infosphere. But yeah, I mean, to put some solid science behind it is actually really important. Okay, so that's all been really interesting and very useful. So I guess you're a person with, an innate amount of nutritional knowledge, a huge amount of experience, industrial experience, academic experience. So, and you've seen many fads and trends come and go, and oh my God, there's been many. I want to ask you some questions, from personal opinion, okay? So I'll start with the myth that you'd most likely or most like to see retired.
Am I allowed to talk about one that we've already talked about?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would like to see the myth that seed oils are toxic retired. And I'd like to see that retired because it's incorrect. But I'd like to see it retired because seed oils actually take up a huge part of our diet. About 10% of our energy comes from seed oils. And that seed oils, if not consumed in unhealthy processed foods, actually can give us great health benefits. They're packed full of heart healthy oils and often packed full of very healthy other nutrients like vitamin E, for example. So I'd like to see that one gone.
Okay, and I'm just going to tiny caveat that you're talking then about seed oils as in their raw state, like added to salads and dressings and whatnot, where they're not part of a Frankfurter or ultra processed.
Yeah, so I'm talking about seed oils drizzled on salads, used in home cooking. I'm also talking about seed oils added to foods. So I would rather my chips fried in seed oils than in beef tallow, which is what RFK in the US is advocating, that we fry our chips in beef tallow. No, I'd rather see them fried in seed oils. I would happily consume seed oils in cooked, baked, fried products. I recently published, actually last week, a study that looked at repeatedly heated seed oils versus unheated seed oils and looked at how that impacts short-term measures of health and showed that there was no detrimental effect of consuming seed oils, even if they were repeatedly heated over 10 days at very high temperatures. So it's fine to have them in that. What I'm caveating is that there are a lot of seed oils added to unhealthy products. So whilst I think seed oils are healthy for us, if they're added into other products that are inherently unhealthy, then obviously they're not healthy.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, that's good and that's clear. The habit that matters more than people realize.
Oh gosh,
We're talking about food here.
that's a hard one. I would say snacking. I know we've talked about it, but because it accounts for such a huge proportion of our energy for many people, I think that it is the single simplest dietary strategy that we can implement to improve health. And I think it's something people don't think about as much as they do maybe of their overall diet. And when they think of their overall diet, I think people typically think of their main meals.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point you made. You know, the evening meal, if you're like, oh, I'll have one less potato. Of course, the Irish would have been you know, but yes, they've had the Snickers bar an hour earlier. It'd be better to cut the Snickers bar and have the potato. Yeah. Okay, so that's a good point. All right. And then lastly, what you still get wrong yourself.
Oh my gosh,
Because you're human.
we'd be here all day
Well-
if I was to tell you what I still get wrong. Well, I'll tell you what I get right first,
Okay.
if that's okay, is that I believe that food is so much part of our social setting, our culture, our interactions with people, and that ultimately should be there to bring us joy as well as nourish us. And so what I do get right is, first and foremost, I always make my dietary choices based on what will also bring me joy.
Okay.
The problem with that is that sometimes then I do get lots of things wrong. I would say the thing that I know that I really need to stop doing is the really late night grazing. And that is typically out of habit. And we know from research, most people who do late night grazing, snacking, it's out of habit. And it's typically on foods that aren't very healthy. Now, I'm not saying I need to stop that totally, but at 10:30 at night, typically I'm getting the crisps and the chocolate out. Do I really need it? Not really. And it's just a habit. So that's one thing that I think I get wrong and I would like to change. But diet isn't about perfection. There's loads of other things I know I absolutely get wrong, but I don't worry about it. I don't sweat the small stuff. The key thing is to make sure I get plenty of fibre. Do I get enough? Probably not. I'm working on that. But it's to focus on what I can add in rather than worrying about what I'm not doing right. And I think that's something that should be a really positive message for people. I think we obsess so much about what we're doing wrong. And it's like, actually, no, why don't you focus on what are you doing right and what can you do that's even better? Add in that fibre, add in those extra fruits and vegetables, pulses, beans, seeds, nuts. The other stuff will look after itself.
Yeah, yeah.
And
it's
enjoy
big
your
picture.
food.
Exactly. It's very personal. And it's big picture. It's not every day, you know, you don't have to have it right. Every day it's just on the whole. Do you think the late like grazing is psychosomatic? Do you think it's like not going to bed early? Is it a throwback from, you know, or is it just pure habitual? I take calories because I'm hungry. I mean, is it driven by blood sugar spikes that make you hungry and then
For me
forever?
personally,
Do you think it's
I th-
snacking is a late
I
night
think a
snacking?
lot of it's out of habit. There's some
Yeah.
great research that's come out of Ireland actually, where they did this big study looking at why people snack, the timing that they snack, the choices that they make, etc. And the biggest reason that people gave for snacking, particularly late night snacking, was habit. It's just, oh, it's what I do. And so I think there's a big habit factor, not just to late night snacking, but actually to a lot of our dietary habits. Yes, we know that many people get a blood sugar dip, so blood glucose dip about 2 to 3 hours after they've had a high carbohydrate meal. So if they're having their evening meal at 6, maybe they're in that blood sugar dip. Maybe they need to look at what their evening meal was. Was it just full of refined carbohydrates? Did it have enough protein, healthy fats, etc., that would limit that dip? So maybe for some people, they're seeking out those foods. And we know this from our own research. If you're having that dip, then you kind of go into like overdrive of hunger, of needing to get your glucose back up. But I think a lot of it is just habit, or not having a big enough, filling enough, balanced enough main meal. For me, I think it's about habit, and growing up, we would have our tea really early, and so we call our evening meal tea in England, or we did growing up. It's now called dinner, but we would have that about 4 or 5 o'clock. And I remember ever since I was a child, we would then have a bowl of cereal before we went to bed. And so I am used to going to bed.
Same house.
But I'm used to going to bed probably with a full tummy.
Yeah.
They say that you shouldn't go to bed with a full tummy. And yes, the evidence shows late night eating is not good for us. But that's what I've been used to. I give my kids a little snack before bed. And, this is where I think it really shows, God, I've got all these years of knowledge, but I'm still doing what I have, what was cultural, what has been passed down.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I was going. I think a lot of it is ingrained in us.
Yeah.
From habit, yes, but what's driven by our parents, and like even the chew your food slowly. Like I can hear my grandmother saying, slow down, chew your food slowly, and so, yeah.
And it's hard to change your diet. I remember when my mum first served up my dad some pasta, he was horrified. He was like, well, where's the meat?
Yeah.
You have your meat, potatoes, 2 veg.
Yeah.
That's the meal. And my husband's still quite like that. It's like you've got your meat, and then that's the centerpiece.
Yeah.
And God forbid there's pulses. And and that's what we have to remember as well. Like people who aren't in the wellness world, who aren't nutritionists, aren't dietitians, it's so difficult to change your diet because it's so ingrained in so many different areas of our life, whether it's our upbringing, our culture, etc. And it does take a lot of mental load to change your diet.
It does.
And to change the kind of foods that you typically use, the ingredients you typically cook with.
Yeah. And then you're in a sea of misinformation and conflicting information and just confusion all around.
Totally.
Yeah. So it really is about just starting your own journey and making one change at a time.
But I think that's a really important note to finish on is do your own journey, how it fits with you, and one change at a time. And whilst I really advocate for changing snacks, the other thing I would say is if you do want to start improving your health as well as looking at your snacks, start by just changing your breakfast. If you consume breakfast, again, that's about 20% of our energy. We know from research, if you start your day off in a balanced way, so not on a glucose roller coaster, not on, a roller coaster from one other metabolic responses to the food, you will tend to make better choices throughout the day, and you will tend to feel better throughout the day. And so we know from our own research, if people choose a kind of breakfast that's a very refined carbohydrate breakfast that causes them to have a dip 2 to 4 hours after, they go on to consume about 300 calories more compared to if they consume the next day a breakfast that's more balanced. So breakfast that's balanced is one that I would say would have, as well as carbohydrates, would have healthy protein, healthy fat, and plenty of fibre. And they will consume on average 300 calories less compared to the day that they had a breakfast that caused them to have a dip. Set yourself up right. And so don't go beat yourself up and try and change everything. change your breakfast tomorrow, slow down how fast you're eating your food, and then you're halfway there.
Yeah. Okay, it's been fascinating. Thank you so much, Sarah Berry. We could cover hours more. So, for everyone listening, I'm sure you'll agree that's been really helpful. And like and share. And the more you like, the more you share, the more episodes we can do. So, thank you again, Sarah.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me on.